So it's almost Thanksgiving, quite possibly one of the most tradition-laden holidays of the year, except perhaps for Passover or Christmas, which are both filled with strong opinions about the right way to celebrate. In my house, if you don't have green bean casserole with French's fried onions on top, it's not Thanksgiving. For some people, stuffing must be made with dried sourdough bread, while for others it must be made with cornbread. Anything else is heresy. And don't get me started on whether mac and cheese belongs on the Thanksgiving table. Yes, please. Or the whole cranberry versus jellied cranberry sauce debate. Me, I'm team jelly in a can. Many years ago when I was living in Chicago, I remember when pumpkin spice lattes were only a few years old and were already catching on as a fall favorite. And I went there to study for an hour or so, and there was this big sign on the door of a person's hands lovingly wrapped around their green and white paper cup. And it said, "Take comfort in rituals." And as a seminary student, I was appalled. Rituals? Pumpkin spice lattes are not a ritual. But now I think, yeah, they kind of might be. Granted, they are one steeped in our consumerist society, but I do love the occasional pumpkin spice latte. It has gained a sort of meaning for me. It means fall is really here. The point is, we can cling tightly to our traditions. They give us comfort. But I learned recently what the word tradition actually means. In its Latin form and all that fancy etymology stuff, the root is tradere, which means to hand over or to pass on. To pass on, not to hold on. And as I think about passing something on, I think about how it needs to change. It necessarily will change every time it is handed on. Our focus this month in our services throughout the month of November, in our Sunday services, our religious education for children, and our journey groups, the theme is ready for a change. Our settling song each Sunday this month has said, "Lift me up to the light of change." And this gorgeous wall hanging that was created by some of our fellowship fabric artists depicts one of the most profound physical changes that we witness in the natural world, the life cycle of a butterfly from caterpillar to chrysalis to winged butterfly. Wow. And the chrysalis here on the right, it's the very end stage of the chrysalis of a monarch butterfly. A couple years ago, one of our fellowship members, Mark Scheffler, lent me, or gave our family, a few monarch caterpillars to take care of. We had jars with mesh on top so the caterpillar could breathe, and every day we would feed them with an astonishing number of these gigantic milkweed leaves. They would just eat it up. And then one day, the caterpillar would climb to the top of the jar and hang upside down in this shape of a J, and then boom, chrysalis. And it didn't look like this one. You can't see inside a chrysalis. It's a light minty green color with threads of gold around the top and the sides. I have a necklace version of the monarch chrysalis. It's made of a green gemstone and it has real gold around the edges, and it is almost as pretty as the real thing. And then after about 2 weeks, you'll go to check on that minty green chrysalis, and it's black. But it's actually not black, it's see-through. And you can see the wings of the monarch inside. That's the end of the stage, and soon the monarch will emerge. Its wings are all wet and floppy, and soon they'll dry off and it will fly away. And I remember learning some time ago what actually happens inside the chrysalis. It's not like the caterpillar goes in there, loses some bulk, and sprouts wings, which I think has kind of been my vague understanding prior to learning more. You see, it first digests itself from the inside out. It turns itself basically into goo. Some of the body parts of the caterpillar remain, but not very many. Most of the cells turn into stem cell type cells called imago or imaginal cells. These cells are undifferentiated, which allows them to change into what they need to become. They allow the new to emerge from the old. And I love that the name of those cells implies imagination, something new transforming from the old, imago cells. I wonder what the caterpillar thinks is happening when it goes to hang upside down and form that chrysalis. I mean, it just does it instinctually. But I would guess that when those digestive juices start attacking their body, that they're like, wait, I don't know if I want to do this. This is scary. And then goo. Our fellowship and our world have been going through major transformation, but not just changing shape and sprouting wings. We have had to go through some pretty painful and scary and stressful changes first. Like the man with the story, when the story broke, we've been kind of standing here looking at all of the pieces of what we thought the story was. And we're wondering how on earth we're going to put it back together. So first, let's think about our fellowship. So many changes, some of which we are only starting to begin to process out loud. Reverend Rogers' departure after a long and stable tenure of 25 years, Jay Thomas's and then Reverend Leah's departure after almost a decade each, Marie Luna's departure after 19 years with us as our Director of Congregational Life, and of course, my arrival, Steve's arrival, Reverend Allie's arrival, and then departure, Hannah's arrival, and the pandemic. The pandemic, which exacerbated the trends that all religious communities had seen in the before times, but now are seeing more lower attendance, more online attendance, volunteer burnout, staff stress, financial concerns, and a powerful need for out-of-the-box thinking. We are, you might say, in the goo phase of transformation. The world has also been through these same changes to the way people think about work, health, family, community, have all radically transformed in the past few years, and there are some who are clinging to the old ways, and they're not doing well. The same is true for congregations. If we expect to go through this phase and emerge the same as we were before, that would be wanting to remain a caterpillar. And there's nothing wrong with caterpillars, they're beautiful, but once they turn to goo, they can never go back. They have to go through the hard transformation to the next phase to be a butterfly. And the amazing thing about the goo phase, I'm sure there's a more scientific name for it, but that goo phase is that those imaginal cells are there, reminding the butterfly what they once were and what they might become. Like the story with the man with the story, putting parts of his old story into the new one when they put it back together. The 19th century Unitarian minister Theodore Parker once preached a sermon called "The Transient and the Permanent in Christianity." Remember that at that time, Unitarians considered themselves Christian. He was responding in this incredibly long sermon to the concern that he was hearing among people who were worried about all these newfangled ideas in church in the 1800s. He said, quote, "Yet there are some who are affrighted by the faintest rustle which a heretic makes among the dry leaves of theology. They tremble lest Christianity itself should perish without hope." He goes on considerably later, "It must be confessed, though with sorrow, that transient things form a great part of what is commonly taught as religion. An undue place has often been assigned to forms and doctrines, while too little stress has been laid on the divine life of the soul, love to God and love to humanity, end quote. He's talking about change. He's talking about the transformation of the forms, the trappings, the dressings of the faith that he called his own, and how that transient stuff did not, in fact, change anything about the faith, which was permanent. He says an undue place has often been assigned to forms, while too little stress has been laid on the divine life of the soul, to love of God and love of humanity. The forms are not the important stuff, and we need not tremble lest we perish without hope. We can just let the transformation happen. Now, I know Reverend Hannah mentioned this a few weeks ago, and Reverend Allie discussed it last week, but now it is my turn to talk about the Unitarian Universalist Association's Article 2 Commission. Stay with me. It's actually really fun. The work that has been undertaken for the past couple of years by committed UU professionals and lay people who have volunteered considerable amounts of their time to serve on this committee to examine our principles, purposes, and sources, to determine if there is a more relevant form that these can take for our current and future UUA. You can find our existing principles and sources near the front cover of your gray, larger hymnal. They currently take the form of 7 bullet points in a list, followed by 6 more bullet points in a list. The 7 principles, or 8, for those congregations that have been affirming the emerging principle which calls us to accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions. This list is very important to Unitarian Universalists. It's so important that we print it on posters and wallet cards and t-shirts. In fact, we here at the Fox Valley UU Fellowship painted them on the entryway wall. When you walk in the front doors, if you look up, there they are, 7 principles. But the problem with this kind of commitment to these principles is that we are clinging to them in that form. Remember what Theodore Parker said about forms? We insist that they stay the same. In fact, the last time the commission was formed to revise the principles and sources several years ago, maybe 15 years, 12 years ago, I don't remember, the gathered body of the UUA voted to reject any change, which means that it has been almost my entire lifetime that these words have stayed the same. For a faith tradition committed to openness and flexibility and change, we are a little stuck on this bullet-pointed list. I mean, I love it. I love the song we sing with our kids. I love that we can make it into a rainbow, but we're getting a little stuck. Our current principles are prefaced with these words: we, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote, and then they list that neat list of 7 principles, or 8, which we uphold. The new draft version, which was recently released, is pretty different. It isn't as neat and clean as a list. The new draft version is a web. I know my slide image is not as much fun as Amanda's. Sorry. It's like the total opposite. But you see here that the new version of our principles shows love at the center, with 6 more values connecting to that center. And Allie mentioned last week we had a conversation. Our current 7 principles do not name love anywhere. And yet anyone in a UU congregation would name love as an important value that we hold, particularly from our Universalist heritage. So they have named it love at the center, and they have written a preface that goes like this: love is the enduring force that holds us together. As Unitarian Universalists in religious community, we covenant, congregation to congregation and through our association, to support and assist each other in engaging our ministries. We draw from our heritages of freedom and reason, hope and courage, building on the foundation of love. Love inspires and powers the passion with which we embody our values. Inseparable from one another, these shared values are, and then they go on to list and explain in a little more detail each of the following connected 6 values: justice, generosity, evolution, pluralism, equity, and interdependence. You can find in these words, and you can even more clearly if you read the whole document on the UUA website, uua.org, you can see that the imaginal cells of our existing 7 principles are still there. The first time I read through these, I was pretty impressed at the work of the commission, at how effectively they were able to keep what is true about our faith, what is permanent, you might say, while transforming the other parts to adapt to the changes in our congregations and our ministries and in the world. These are, of course, a draft. As people throughout our UU world give their feedback to the commission, and you are invited to do that, just go to the UUA website and you can find out more. That feedback will make these draft language change. But the final draft will be voted on at General Assembly this coming June in Pittsburgh. If you would like to attend General Assembly as a delegate from this congregation to vote on these new principles and on the new president of the UUA, it's going to be a big General Assembly, you can attend in person in Pittsburgh, or you can attend online through their virtual platform. Just let me or Reverend Hannah know if you are interested in that kind of participation. GA is very cool. My hope is that no matter what the changes end up being, that the delegates of General Assembly are able to allow some change, some transformation, like a tradition we pass on to the future, not one that we cling to from the past. As we think about all the changes that we have been through, personally in our own lives, as a fellowship community, and as a society at large, what has been the permanent? What is truly ours that does not rely on the particularities as much as we might have loved those particularities? What parts of our story will remain when it gets put back together? What traditions will we not cling to, but that we will pass on with changes to keep them vital in a changing world? You know, maybe I will try some whole cranberry sauce this year. May it be so, and amen.